Hello everyone! Welcome to our video presentation on Module 14, Constructivism, Knowledge Construction and Concept Learning. In this module, we will explore how learners build their own understanding of the world and how teachers can guide this process. By the end of this lesson, we aim to explain the role of constructivism in facilitating learning, describe strategies that promote knowledge construction, and describe strategies to facilitate concept learning. Before we dive deeper, let's recall what we've learned from previous theories. In the earlier modules, we discussed the ideas of Piaget and Brunner, both of whom strongly influenced the development of constructivism. Constructivism is actually the distillation or combination of many ideas from cognitive psychology. Let's compare it to what we already know about learning theories. In behaviorism, learning focuses on what we can see, the external or observable behavior. Here, learning happens when there's a connection between a stimulus and a response. Reinforcement, such as awards, rewards, or punishments, plays a key role. In this view, the learner is seen as passive, someone who simply reacts to what the teacher provides. However, the cognitive view sees learning as an active process. Learners do not just receive information. Instead, they search, discover, and reorganize what they know to create new insights. As the saying goes, education is not the feeling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. This means learning shouldn't just be about memorizing facts, but about sparking curiosity and understanding. This idea leads us to constructivism. Constructivism is more associated with cognitive psychology than behaviorism. It focuses on knowledge construction, how learners actively build their own understanding based on experiences. Just like in Piaget and Brunner's theories, learning isn't about passively receiving information. It's about exploring, discovering, and constructing meaning. Within constructivism, there are two main perspectives: individual constructivism and social constructivism. Let's discuss each one. First, individual constructivism, also called cognitive constructivism. This emphasizes the internal and personal construction of knowledge. It's largely based on Jean Piaget's theory. Here, learners are seen as independent explorers who build understanding through experience. Proponents of this view prefer child-centered and discovery approaches, allowing learners to find principles through their own exploration rather than direct instruction from teachers. On the other hand, social constructivism highlights the importance of interaction. It is based on Lev-Vygotsky theory, which emphasizes that knowledge exists in a social context. According to this view, learning begins when ideas are shared with others through discussion, collaboration, and communication, before becoming part of an individual's understanding. Knowledge construction here is shared by two or more people. By interacting and exchanging ideas, learners refine and reshape their thoughts. In other words, learning becomes social, not just individual. To sum it up, constructivism teaches us that learning happens best when learners are actively involved. Whether it's through individual discovery or social interaction, students build their own understanding based on experiences and reflection. And as future educators, it is our role to design learning experiences that encourage exploration, discussion, and meaning-making, turning classrooms into spaces for active knowledge construction. That's for my time.
So good day everyone. We will tackle today about the characteristic of constructivism. And there are 4 characteristics that these two views have in common, according to Ejen and Kauchak. And these are, so first is learners construct understanding. Second is new learning depends on current understanding. third is learning is facilitated by social interaction. And lastly, meaningful learning occurs within authentic learning tasks. So first is learners construct understanding, and constructivists do not view learners as just empty vessels waiting to be filled up. So they see learners as active thinkers who interpret new information based on what they already know. So they construct knowledge in a way that makes sense to them. In other words, instead of passively receiving information, learners actively create their own knowledge by connecting new ideas to what they knew already. So it is like linking your existing knowledge and your new ideas. So for example, imagine you're trying to learn a new cooking recipe. So if you already know basic cooking techniques like frying and boiling, you'll understand the new recipe more quickly than someone who has never cooked before. So your existing knowledge helps you construct an understanding of the new recipe. So the second one is new learning depends on current understanding. So background information is very important. It is through the present views or scheme that the learner has that new information will be interpreted. So what learners already understand is crucial because they interpret new information through the lens of their current knowledge and beliefs. So for example, a person who already knows how to ride a bicycle can more easily learn how to ride a motorcycle because they already understand balance and steering. So the third one is learning is facilitated by social interaction. So constructivists believe in creating a community of learners within classrooms. Learning communities help learners to take responsibility for their own learning. Learners have a lot of opportunities to cooperate and collaborate to solve problems and discover things. So teachers plays the role of a facilitator rather than an expert who has all the knowledge. So in simple terms, learning is enhanced when students interact with each other, sharing ideas, and working in a community of learners. So for example, students working on a group project, each contributing their unique skills and knowledge, leading to a better understanding of the topic than if they had studied alone. So the last characteristic of constructivism is the meaningful learning occurs within authentic learning tasks. An authentic task is one that involves a learning activity that involves constructing knowledge and understanding needed when applied in the real world. In other words, learning is more effective when it involves real-world tasks that are relevant and meaningful to the learner. And this helps in constructing knowledge that can be applied in practical situations. So for example, instead of just learning about fractions in a math class, students bake a cake measuring ingredients and dividing portions, which helps them understand fractions in a practical way. And those are the characteristics of constructivism according to Ejen and Kauchak.
Hi everyone, I'm going to talk about organizing knowledge. So focusing on concepts, how we form and understand ideas in our minds. So a concept is simply a way of grouping or categorizing things in our mind. For example, the concept of teach include tasks like explaining, modeling, discussing, and helping others learn. So as student, we learn thousands of concepts. Some are easy, and some take more time and experience to understand. There are different ways to understand how concepts work. The first one is concept as feature list. This means we'll learn the features or characteristics that define something. There are two kinds. A defining feature is something that must be there. For example, a triangle has three sides. If it doesn't, it's not a triangle. Meanwhile, a correlational feature is something that usually there, but not always. Like when we say a mother is loving, it's common but not required to be a mother. We have concepts of prototypes. A prototype is a mental image of a typical example of something. For example, if I ask you to imagine a cat, you probably think of an ordinary house cat, not a rare breed.
That's your prototype. When we see new examples, our brain compares them to this image we already have. There are concepts of exemplars. These mean we store different examples of something in our memory. For example, when you think of vegetables, you might think of cabbage, kangkong, corn, squash, or potatoes. So, when you encounter a new vegetables like vitsuelas, you compare it with the examples you already know. Sum up, concepts help us organize what we know. We understand them through features, imagine them through prototypes, and recognize them through exemplars. By organizing concepts in our minds, we make learning easier and more meaningful. That's all for my report about organizing knowledge and concepts.
So good day everyone. My topic is all about making concept learning effective. So as a future teachers, we can help students learn concepts by doing the following. So there are 8 tips to make concept learning effective. First is provide a clear definition of the concept. So explain what the concept means in simple words. So klaro og mas masabtan. So make sure students understand the basic idea. So example, if you're teaching about democracy, it explains that it is a system where people vote to choose their leaders. So gina-explain siya in simple terms. So next is make the defining features very concrete and prominent. So here is we should highlight the important details parts of the concepts. So we should use the real examples to make it clear. So for example, triangle. 'Di ba sa triangle there are 3 sides and 3 angles. So mas masabtan mo siya pag naay features nga makita. So next is give a variety of positive instances. So show many examples of the concept. The more example, the better students will understand. So for example, a teacher show pictures of dog, cats, or elephants and human. So the picture shows a mammal. So ginapakita dito ang kung unsa ang kung kung unsa ang mga klase-klase nga mammals like dogs, cats, elephants, and humans. So next is give negative instances. So we should show examples of the concept that is not related. This helps students to understand the boundaries of the concept. For example, kay ang teacher kay nagtudlo siya og kanang mga different kinds of langgam sa mga langgam. Then a bat and naay isa ka nalahi ang bat. So gina-explain sa teacher nga dili siya birds kay wala siya feather. So murag kanang gina-limit nila ang boundaries. So next is cite a best example or a prototype. So here is we should provide a clear and typical example of the concept. So this image that student use as a reference. So kunta ay apple. Ang apple kay best siya gamiton sa best example nga gamiton kay dali raman siya, common raman siya ug dali ra siya ma-recognize. So next is provide opportunity for learners to identify positive and negative instances. So let the student practice recognizing examples and non-examples of the concept. So for example, show a series of pictures and ask the students to identify which one are vehicles and which ones are not. So magpakita ko og mga example sa mga sakyanan. So ang students ginapadetermine mo sa imong student kung asa ang vehicles o asa ang dili vehicles. So that they can they can understand. So next is ask learners to think of their own example of the concept. So here is, we should encourage our students to come up with their own example. This shows how they truly understand the concept. Kung nasabtan ba nila ang concept or wala. So lastly is point out how concepts can be related to each other. So help student to see the connection, help the student see connection between the different concepts. This builds a broader understanding of the world. So tabangan nato atong estudyante nga mas masabtan nila kung unsay mga diferensya ato nga concepts para mas masabtan nila og maayo. So for example, explain the democracy. So democracy, di ba, related sa freedom and rights. So in this concept, mas masabtan nila ang meaning sa isa ka concepts. So next is applying constructivism in facilitating learning. So first is aim to make learners understand a few key ideas in a depth manner rather than taking up so many topics superficially. So it focus on teaching a few important details. So dili na kakailangan maabot sa layo, mag-focus lang jud siya sa kung unsa ang important details. So for example, like instead of mag-study ta about sa all planets and solar system, so dapat murag mas mag-focus ta sa Earth nga explaining the atmosphere or climate and why it is supports life. So kaya mao man tong atua, so dito ta mag-focus. So next is give varied examples. So we should use different types of examples para mas masabtan sa estudyante ang mga topics in different angles. So for example, when teaching about recycling, we should show examples nga kanang mga recycle na paper, plastics, and unsa pa ba na dira. So next is provide opportunities for experimentation. So we should let our student to try things out and learn by doing. So for example, if you're teaching about plants, so let the student plant seeds and watch them grow. So pasagdi sila nga makatuon sila by doing. So let them experience para mas makatuon sila. So next is provide lots of opportunities for quality interaction. So we should encourage students to talk to each other and share their ideas. So pasagdaan nato ang atong estudyante nga or use their opportunities para ma-share ilahang ideas or kung unsa ilahang nasabtan. So for example, kanang solving. So in a group of people or students have to solve a problem. So this way they can learn from each other and develop their communication skills by helping each other. So sharing their ideas para mas magkasinabtanay sila. So next is have a lots on hands-on activities. So use activities that involve students' senses and allow them to physically interact with the materials. So dapat ka ng hands-on activities na mas ma-involve ang students, like sa science when studying different types of rock, kanang naay klase-klase nga bato, let the students touch, feel, and compare i-compare nila ang mga rock gamit ilahang senses para mas masabtan nila. So next is relate your topic to real life situation. So show students how the topic is relevant to their lives and the world around them. So, so show student how the topic is relevant to their lives. So, when teaching math, use examples that student can relate, like calculating the cost of groceries, figuring out how much time it will take to get school, ingon na bas para mas masabtan nila ang topic o related sa ilahang kinabuhi. So next is, do not depend on explanation method all the time. So we don't just lecture all the time. We should use a variety of teaching methods to keep students engaged and interested. So samaan na mag use ka ng mga games, mga activities, group activities, mga experiments para mas fun ug effective ang pagtudlo. So dili lang para makatuon sila o para mas effective ang learning experience sa mga bata. So that's all.
Good noon, everyone. My name is Angel May R. Pilapil. Today, I will be discussing the topic transfer of learning. This concept is an essential part of educational psychology and plays a significant role in the teaching and learning process. Transfer of learning occurs when learning in one context or with one set of materials affects performance in another context, or with related materials. In simple terms, it is the process of applying previous acquired knowledge or skills to a new different situation. For example, a person who learns roller skate may find it easier to learn how to ice skate. Similarly, a child who learns to get along with classmates in preschool can later adjust more easily to group work or team activities in higher levels. Transfer of learning is a very significant concept because it reflects how education can help learners apply their knowledge beyond the classroom. So, as future educators, our goal should not only to ensure that our students learn, but also that they can apply what they have learned in real-life situation. Types of transfer. There are 4 types of transfer of learning. The first one is positive transfer. Positive transfer occurs when learning in one context improves performance in another. For example, a person who speaks Spanish may find it easier to learn Mexican Spanish than to learn Japanese. So, the second types of transfer is the negative transfer. Negative transfer occurs when prior learning interferes with new learning. For instance, a learner may carry over their native language's pronunciation or grammar patterns when speaking a new language, which can affect accuracy. So, the third one is near transfer. Near transfer refers to the transfer between very similar contexts. An example of this is when students answer algebra problems in an exam that are very similar to those they have practiced in class. The last one is far transfer. Far transfer happens when learning is applied to very different or remote contexts. For example, Stephen Covey applied the moral lesson of Aesop's fable, the ghost that learned the golden eggs, to the management of organization. That's all for my part.
Next, we have the conditions and principles of transfer. These principles are based on the factors that affect transfer of learning. These factors are similar to what Perkins termed as conditions of transfer. So, here are the factors with the consequent principles and educational implications. First, we have the similarity between two learning situations. This refers to the degree of overlap between the original context where something was learned, like a classroom, and the new context where it needs to be applied. The principle of transfer: the more similar the two situations are, the greater the chances that learning from one situation will be transferred to the other situation. The implication: it involves students in learning situations and tasks that are similar as possible to the situations where they would apply the tasks. Next, we have the degree of meaningfulness or relevance of learning. This means the knowledge or skill is understood deeply, not just memorized by rote, and is perceived by the learner as being important and applicable to their life or goals. The principle of transfer: meaningful learning leads to greater transfer than rote learning. The implication: remember to provide opportunities to learners to link new material to what they learned in the past. Next, we have the length of instructional time. So this condition emphasizes that sufficient time and focused effort must be spent on the initial learning to ensure a thorough, deep mastery of the material. The principle of transfer: the longer the time spent in instruction, the greater the probability of transfer. The implication: to ensure transfer, teach a few topics in depth rather than many topics tackled in a shallow manner. Next, we have the variety of learning experiences. This involves exposing the learner to the same concept or skill across many different examples, problems, and contexts. The principle of transfer: exposure to many and varied examples and opportunities for practice encourages transfer. The implication: it illustrates new concepts and principles with variety of examples. Plan activities that allow your learners to practice their newly learned skills. Next, we have the context for learners' experiences. So this highlights the importance of explicitly connecting new learning to different subjects, disciplines, and real-life scenarios. The principle of transfer: transfer of learning is most likely to happen when learners discover that what they learn is applicable to various contexts. Implication: relate a topic in one subject to topics in other subjects or disciplines. Relate it also to real-life situations. Next, we have the focus on principles rather than tasks. This means instruction should emphasize the underlying general rules, concepts, or principles that govern a topic, instead of focusing narrowly on the steps required to complete a single specific task. The principle of transfer: principles transfer easier than facts. The implication: zero and one in on principles related to each topic together with strategies based on those principles. And next, we have the emphasis on metacognition. This refers to encouraging the learners thinking about thinking, their awareness and control of their own cognitive process. When students reflect on how they solve problems, why certain strategies work, and when to use them. The principle of transfer: student reflection improves transfer of learning. The implication: it encourages students to take responsibility for their own learning and to reflect on what they learn.